Hi, everybody. So, yeah, from my last video, there's been a lot of great discussion, like solid, like really on point. And I would like it's substantial discussion. Some stuff of substance. I feel like we're actually getting to the heart of the matter here. About the last video I did, which was about the diatribe, the yet another diatribe on why the drawing fundamentals are important. And so I've responded to pretty much anybody that I had more than more than two. If I had more than two words to say, then I pretty much respond to everybody. And this sort of discussion is really fantastic, wonderful. So now there's the last one that's here as of when I started recording this video that I want to actually get. I think this is the one where I actually want to base a video on it. So right here at the end where it's like, veering into why don't more artists work like I do, which doesn't exactly respect the wants of individuals. This is an excellent question. I know it sounds like I'm cherry picking. I'm not. I think this is something that I never asked myself. I tend to ask, why don't more artists work like I do? The truth is, I didn't, up until now, I didn't think about it. I didn't know. Now I know. The problem is not that people don't have the fundamentals. The problem is not that they don't know, perspective, or that anatomy is important, or this is important, or that's important. The problem is they look at fundamentals as a collection. That's the problem. They look at fundamentals as a bunch of these just disconnected parts. So, you've got fundamental A, you've got fundamental B, you have fundamental C, right? So maybe they think one of them is for anatomy, and the other one is for perspective, and the next one is for draftsmanship. And they're just going after the fundamentals like Pokemon. They just got to get them all. But what they don't have, what they're trying to do is just like, if drawing is like a tool, a thing for getting stuff done, I look at drawing as a machine. It's like a machine. It's a machine for making, like a 3D printer. A 3D printer is a machine. The 3D printer has within it a platform, and it has this enclosure, and the enclosure also has some of them would actually have like a track system for moving up and down in one axis. And then on this plane, which can be moved up and down within the 3D printer, there is a crossbar. That crossbar allows for moving in the three different axes. And then on top of that, there's like a little a gun which shoots down plastic. And then you've got a pump and maybe a plastic melter. So there's like a feed line which goes into this thing. There's a pump. You have a plastic melter system and a feed system, and all that stuff feeds into this thing. And the thing goes around, and it either moves the platform or raises the thing up, and it creates like layers and layers and layers of this stuff, and it builds it from the bottom up, or it draws in one spot and it lowers the platform and it grows it that way. Right now, this thing is a machine. Okay, and so when I look at drawing is kind of like 3D printing. There's a machine that you've got, and what people are doing when they deal with the fundamentals is they're only making sure, do I have the enclosure? Good, check. Do I have the motors? Check. Do I have the the axes and the bars? Do I have the supply of plastic? Do I have all these things? But what they haven't done is they haven't assembled it. They've got the parts. They say, okay, I can draw in perspective, or I can draw straight lines. I can do these things, but they haven't made the process. They don't know the order in which you need to assemble the machine, and they don't know how the machine works. They don't know that when you feed the plastic in, the plastic is not in a usable form. It has to be heated up first into a liquid. Then you have to pump and inject that stuff, down the feed line. Or actually, I think a lot of times the heating system is actually on this thing here. It's not up here. So usually what happens is you'd have your coils. Yeah. So what you'd have is your coil stored, stored coils of plastic, which are, motivated downwards. And then you have like this combination heating injection system that's over here, because otherwise that stuff, would cool on the way there. Right. But the thing is that just look at how I analyze this, right? When I know how a 3D printer works, I understand. Sorry about the steam pings in the background that you're hearing. So anyway, I know that because the 3D printer works by melting plastic and then injecting it, I know that you can't put the heater up here because the plastic will cool on the way down, and then it won't be liquid by the time it starts to inject it and draw the layers, right? Like, you see what I mean? Like, you see how I understand how that understanding of what the thing does. Because I understand what it does, I'm able to tell, well, you can't put this part here. You have to move it down there, right? This is not, it's not enough to just have the parts. You have to know what it does, how it does it. Then you can troubleshoot what's going wrong. People who give a lot of critique may have the parts, but they don't know the function of the overall machine, and they don't know what the machine really is doing. That's what they're missing. They're missing the process. They've got steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, except they don't really have the connected order. They don't know how these things support one another. They don't know, and for me, this is the process. This is the order. I'm giving it to you right now. Is that you need to be able to draw the straight lines, right? And you need to be able to make those lines go wherever you want them to. Part of that means that you have to make this work. The holding of the stylus has to be right, because if the holding of the stylus isn't right, the lines will wobble out and they won't go where you want them to go. The whole purpose is that, number one, you need to be able to make lines go where you want them to go. So that means control of the arm. You need to think about where you want those lines to go. Hence the reason for a circular template, a target with a goal. And the thing is that you need to be able to create not just any old straight line, but straight lines that go within a whole transitional range of motions, meaning lines that are vertical, lines that are slightly diagonal, and of a certain distance, meaning they hit that. That is the straight line training exercise. Okay. And right. So fine, you have that, and you go all the way around the circle, you get used to that. Then you need to be able to, let's say if we understand straight lines, then there's also curves. So being able to perform the circles, large circles, small circles, again, the range that you have to deal with, being able to perform the range of ellipses that go, that shift aspect ratios, being able to change direction, meaning going from counterclockwise to up, down, and then to clockwise. Right? You're being able to handle the range of motion, because if you look at the 3D printer doesn't just have a fixed arm that doesn't move anywhere. It's got moving parts. It's able to deal with all of these three axes. So, you have to be able to number one, be able to move in all of these axes, make all the straight lines and all the curvatures, all the different shapes that you need to be able to do. That's step one, because it doesn't matter if you want a line in a certain place. If you can't get that line, if you can't get that curve, you see what I mean? The targeting of the curves, the targeting of the straight lines, the positioning of this stuff is dependent. It's dependent upon the ability to make those lines go where you want them to. And that is dependent on your being able to use the arm. Then there are other factors in there, such as your mastery of being able to draw those straight lines in different places, because there's a certain thing called I call it a bandwidth, a mental bandwidth, meaning that here's the problem. You've got a conscious mind. A conscious mind can only do one thing at a time. Not very good at multitasking. Multitasking doesn't really, it doesn't quite really exist. Not conscious multitasking. What you have to do is you have to train the discipline until you do it instinctively. And by instinctively, meaning you don't even think about it. When I draw straight lines now, I always target my lines. I don't just shut my eyes and randomly try to feel the lines out. I always target them. And it feels strange to do anything else. It feels strange to do the wrong way to do it. And the reason why I say there's right and wrong is because one of these methods gets me lines where I want them to. The other method doesn't get me lines. Like nothing else. Or maybe there are other ways to get lines to go where you want them to, such as ghosting, okay? Right? But the thing is this, you have to adopt a method that does one of these things. All right? It has to give you the lines where you want them to. Otherwise, you'll be fighting against it the whole time. Then you need to make it so that it is subconscious, because the poor mental bandwidth, right, of the conscious mind can only handle one thing at a time. And if the mental bandwidth of the conscious mind is stuck on the lines, it won't be able to do anything else. It won't be able to deal with the perspective. It won't be able to deal with making, any of the more advanced technique stuff, like, the aesthetics and the feeling, which is what art is about, right? The reason why I'm so harsh on the fundamentals and always going on and on and on about the fundamentals is because I would eventually like us to get off the ground and into orbit at some point, right? I would eventually like people. It's kind of funny. It seems counterintuitive, but I really would like to see people. I have this need to see people getting to the point where they're so good at the fundamentals that they're not even thinking about it. They don't have to think about it. That they are now free and capable of dealing with all the other wonderful subjective things, the things that make art enjoyable. So, number one, getting the lines to go where you want them to and not having to think about it because of that mental bandwidth. You need the mental bandwidth free. It needs to be free. Next is perspective. And again, this is still, perspective is where we start to figure out, okay, where do, not only can we get the lines to go where we want them to go, where do we want the lines to go? Where do we want these lines to go? And this is the next step. And so this is necessary, right? This is dependent. This stage is dependent on all that straight line stuff. And you can't be stuck thinking about straight line stuff while you're dealing with perspective, for crying out loud. You're dealing with the optical illusion. You don't have time to be thinking about how to make a straight line, right? So you've got to get the straight line stuff first, because the perspective stuff is going to require that you have the straight line stuff and the targeted line, the accurate targeted line. That stuff is your perspective is dependent on your ability to competently create lines where you want them to go, to accurately target the lines where you want them to go. And then after that, after the perspective stuff, then we get to start to figure out, okay, we can draw forms in perspective, we can extrude forms whichever way we want. Then we need to know our subject matter. If we want to draw cars, we need to know the anatomy and construction of the car. If we want to draw people and hands and arms and legs, then we need to know the anatomy and construction of the arms and legs and whatnot. And the thing is that now this is where I start, drawing cross sections, and I draw these things, in perspective in order to construct the arm. Right now, I start drawing cylinders. I use the arcs. I'm able to make. There's where, maybe the elbow is here, and I'm starting to break this all down into these cylindrical shapes. So this is where being able to draw the forms in perspective, being able to draw geometric primitives in perspective, this is necessary because you can't construct something, you can't perform anatomical constructions without the ability to draw the geometric primitives in perspective, without a mastery of perspective. And you can't draw the geometric primitives in perspective without mastering perspective. You can't draw those geometric primitives also if you don't have the ability to make the lines and curves go where you want them to. If you can't target that shit, it's not happening. Okay? It's like the 12 Days of Christmas. That's that fucking song, right? Where they talk about the partridge in a pear tree, right? First day of Christmas, true love gave to me. Partridge in a pear tree, right? Second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me, right? So the thing is that every single verse always has you returning back to that goddamn partridge in a pear tree, right? And I don't even fucking remember all of the verses of that song, but I bring it up as an example, right? I think it's an excellent example where you have to be able to roll all the way back to step one, because that's how it is. That's how it is. You always have to come back to that first step. So that's what people are missing. They're missing, that process, that order, and somewhere along the line they keep dropping one of these things. They keep dropping the fucking partridge in a pear tree. And this is where discipline is required. Discipline is required. Discipline is where, you know, you need the discipline to perform a discipline. This is where, you know, you don't, you know, suddenly become lax in the way that you draw lines. You know, you have to catch yourself. Or rather, you shouldn't have to catch yourself. Because if you had practiced your lines, if you had practiced to the point where now you draw accurate lines without having to think about it, you won't have to catch yourself. People don't bring themselves to the point where they don't have to catch themselves. There's the problem. That's why I say, you know, you gotta really fucking get this shit. You gotta get this shit, because now, you know, when I start drawing the arms and legs and stuff, right, I can start wireframing and cross-contouring and cross-sectioning this thing. And if we start looking really closely, hey, look at that. There's like all this stuff subdivides into box cross sections, motherfucker. It's still there. When you start going into the deeper anatomical design, where you start working out muscles and all those like lumpy bumpy shit, the boxes are still there. They're still there. You don't have to draw the whole thing, but it can be broken down like that. So, you know, so get the lines where you need them to get to, all right? And get to the point where you don't have to think about where those lines go. And the thing is that if you start to, and the mastery kind of comes when you start to do the next stage and you catch yourself dropping number one, okay? Then you got to be able to draw in perspective. Then you got to be able to do construction. Then you got to be able to know anatomy, which is to know the construction of things. And then you got to know about what I would call kinesiology. Kinesiology is the study of human movement. This is knowing that an arm, you know, your elbow can only flex so far. You have to know how far does the arm move. How does the human body move? When you're sitting resting, you know, with your elbow on an arm, you know, on the armchair rest, you know, how is the weight distributed? Inverse kinematics, you know, all these other things that you need to know about just the dynamics of the human body. If you understand how ragdolls work in a video game, right? Those physical ragdolls in a video, if you know that stuff, that'll help you a substantial, you know, amount. This is knowing how you know the forces of physics, how physical forces affect the human body and how the human body interacts and responds with that kind of stuff. Then you get into things like just knowing about composition. You know, how big should things be? How small should they be? How do we focus people's attention to a particular point in space? You know, all these things, right? These are all just the future, the other days. You know, the later and later days in that bloody song. So, you know, that I think is the main problem. So when we start to, you know, between you and I, and hopefully between you and the other people that you critique later on, you understand that when you look at some people and you start to critique their work, that sometimes they are in need of a teardown. Use this word, a teardown, because the thing is that it's not that they don't know the fundamentals, or that they don't know, you know, any number of fundamentals, or this thing is wrong or that thing is wrong. The problem is it's like they haven't connected the fundamentals properly. They're not doing things in the right order. They're not doing things in such a way that one stage is supported by the next and the next and the next. Or they know the fundamentals, but they haven't gotten it to the point where they can do it subconsciously. They have the fundamental, you know, you can say to them, look, I know you know about this fundamental, but the problem is that you only know it on a conscious level, and it's taking up the mental bandwidth, and you have to think about it when you do it. It's not reliable. You can't use it when you have to think about it, because you've got to do it in conjunction with all the other things, right? It's like they all have to be able to work in concert simultaneously, because, you know, there's that interrelation between things. It's not a bunch of just disconnected parts, a bunch of disconnected devices. So, you know, you are all going, like, you're all going to have to practice to the point where you can do this stuff yourself. And then you'll be able to troubleshoot other people's work. You'll be able to perform the teardown, because you're going to be like a car mechanic. You're going to be seeing people running into your garage, you know, pushing their car into the garage, not even driving into the garage. They're going to be pushing their broken up cars, and you're going to realize, oh shit, I'm sorry, we're going to have to take the whole car apart, turn some of these pieces are in backwards, some of these pieces are in the wrong place. They'll have to be reassembled. They'll have to be put together, the right way. Some of these parts are defective. We'll have to take them out, clean them up, polish them up, stick them back in, at the right time. That's what it's going to take. That is what it's going to take to get people on the right path. Because, like I say, they're skipping steps and they're doing things out of order. And they don't have all the parts nice and shiny. Like they're defective parts, or the parts aren't made to work together. The parts don't fit together. They haven't worked. They haven't. It's like when I say, when you do the box exercise and you practice drawing the straight lines as you create those 3-dimensional boxes, right? They haven't made the parts mesh. They haven't. When you take 2 gears, like they haven't adjusted the gears so that they roll together. They're kind of sticking. So these are all the problems that they're facing. Is that it's just a giant it's a giant clusterfuck, and it's unfortunate. So yeah, so I mean I hope that helps people, especially when it comes to critiquing and knowing what they're gonna do. And I would like to see, hopefully in my lifetime, like an era where like just drawing becomes one of these things that becomes commonplace and anyone can do, and it would be really cool. Anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. Things long enough.